You know how some moments in life catch you completely off guard? How one simple invitation can change everything you thought you knew about yourself? Well, let me tell you about the evening that turned my quiet, predictable world upside down. I'm Karen, and I've been working in human resources for almost 30 years. Most recently, I worked at a medium-sized marketing company in Columbus, Ohio. I've always been the type of person who keeps her head down, does her job well, and tries not to cause any trouble. Life taught me early on that staying quiet and being consistent was the best way to get by. But absolutely nothing could have prepared me for what happened that Saturday evening when my boss, Danielle, invited me to her house. Let me tell you about Danielle first. She was in her early 40s, confident as they come, sharp as a knife, and graceful in a way that seemed effortless. She had this amazing ability to walk into any room and completely own it without even saying a single word. As a woman who was a good 20 years older than her, I'll admit I felt pretty intimidated when I first started working with her. But over the past year, something wonderful had happened between us. We developed this surprisingly warm friendship that I never expected. We would often chat over coffee in the break room, laughing about the crazy office politics and even sharing book recommendations with each other. She had this way of making me feel heard, really heard, in a way I hadn't experienced in years. So when she approached me that Thursday afternoon, I figured it had to be about work. "I'd love to get your input on something important," she said, standing casually in my office doorway with that confident smile of hers. "Could you possibly come by my place this weekend? Maybe Saturday evening?" I blinked a few times, completely caught off guard by the invitation. "Oh, sure, of course," I stammered. "Is it about work? Some project we need to discuss?" She gave me this soft, mysterious smile that I couldn't quite read. "In a way," she said gently, "I just think you'll understand what I'm trying to figure out better than anyone else." The mysterious nature of her words should have made me suspicious, should have made me ask more questions. But instead, I felt this strange sense of curiosity building inside me. There was something in her voice, something in the way she looked at me that made me want to know more. Saturday evening finally arrived, cold and crisp like only winter evenings can be. I still remember exactly how the sky looked painted in that deep, rich winter blue that comes right after the sun disappears behind the horizon. I sat in my car outside her house for several minutes, just staring at her beautiful home. It was a perfectly restored craftsman-style house with thick ivy crawling up one entire side, and it looked like something from a magazine. There was this nervous flutter in my chest, a feeling I couldn't quite name or understand. I wasn't sure what I was expecting from this evening, what she wanted to discuss, or why she'd invited me to her personal space instead of just talking at the office. Before I could even reach up to knock on the front door, Danielle opened it wide, as if she'd been standing right there waiting for me to arrive. She was wearing a simple but elegant maroon sweater and black dress pants, completely barefoot on the beautiful hardwood floors. The moment the door opened, I was hit with the most wonderful smell: mulled wine mixed with something warm and spicy. "Maybe clove or sandalwood. You look absolutely wonderful," she said warmly, ushering me inside with a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I gave a nervous little laugh and tried to brush off the compliment like I always did. "Thanks, but I just threw on whatever I could find in my closet." "No," she said gently, stopping me in my tracks. Her eyes briefly scanned my face with an expression I couldn't quite understand. "You look peaceful, like someone who knows exactly who she is deep down inside." That comment hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. It stuck with me as we made our way into her warm, beautifully lit living room. She poured both of us generous glasses of red wine, and we settled into her comfortable couch across from each other, legs tucked under us like we were old friends who'd known each other for decades. We chatted easily for quite a while about all sorts of things: work, gossip, my little garden that I was so proud of, her exciting new kitchen remodel that she'd been planning for months. The conversation flowed naturally, and I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in a very long time. But then, gradually, I noticed the mood in the room beginning to shift into something deeper, something more serious. "Can I ask you something really personal?" she said, her voice becoming softer and more intimate. Her wine glass was resting gently against her knee, and her eyes were focused completely on me. I nodded slowly, feeling a little unsure about where this was heading, but curious enough to continue. "Have you ever had one of those moments where you suddenly realized you've been living a version of your life that wasn't really, truly yours?" she asked. Like you were following all the right steps, doing everything that was expected of you, checking off all the boxes that society told you to check. But somewhere along the way, you just completely forgot to ask yourself if any of it was actually what you wanted for yourself. The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. It was so unexpected, so direct, so exactly what I'd been feeling but couldn't put into words. I found myself staring down at the rim of my wine glass, watching the soft lamplight shimmer and dance through the deep red liquid. I said very slowly, choosing each word carefully. I've spent most of my entire life living inside the lines, you know? Like I was coloring in a coloring book, no surprises, no mess, no risks, just staying safely inside the boundaries someone else had drawn for me. Danielle nodded thoughtfully, her expression becoming even softer and more understanding. And lately, I continued, surprised by my own honesty. I've been wondering constantly about what I might have missed by always staying inside those safe lines. What experiences, what feelings, what parts of myself I never got to explore because I was too scared to color outside the lines. We sat there together for several long moments, the silence between us not uncomfortable or awkward at all, but somehow full and meaningful. It felt like there was something important and unspoken hanging in the air between us, something we both understood on some level but weren't quite ready to name or acknowledge out loud. Then Danielle did something that surprised me completely. She reached out slowly and gently touched my hand. It wasn't bold or inappropriate or crossing any boundaries. Instead, it felt grounding, warm, and deeply comforting in a way I hadn't experienced in years. You've always seemed so composed and put together at work, she said quietly. But I see something else in you, something deeper, something curious and alive, like there's this whole part of you that's still waiting to be discovered and explored. Her words stirred something deep inside me that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't desire exactly, though there was something electric about the moment. It was more like recognition, like someone had finally seen a version of me that I'd forgotten even existed, and not only seen it, but actually named it and honored it. I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone in years, maybe decades. I told her about my husband, Mark, who had passed away 8 long years ago. I told her about how desperately lonely the nights got, how I sometimes found myself wandering slowly through the aisles of grocery stores late at night, just to hear other human voices around me. I shared my deepest fear that I had quietly disappeared into such a predictable routine that no one would even notice if I suddenly vanished completely. She listened to every single word, not the kind of half-hearted, passive listening that most people do while they're just waiting for their turn to speak, but truly, deeply listened. Her whole presence was completely focused on me, attuned to every word, every pause, every emotion I was sharing. Then she said something I know I'll never, ever forget for the rest of my life. You haven't disappeared, Karen. Not even close. You've just been patiently waiting for someone to really, truly look at you and see who you actually are. I felt my throat tighten with emotion, and I had to blink back tears that seemed to come from nowhere. Her words weren't romantic or flirtatious or inappropriate in any way. They were simply human, honest, and real. And I realized in that powerful moment that I had completely forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen, not as someone's mother, or as a widow, or as a manager, or as any of the roles I played, but simply as a woman, as myself, as Karen. The night grew darker and darker outside her living room window. Our wine glasses had been empty for a long time, but neither of us seemed eager to move or break the spell of the evening. There was something absolutely beautiful about sitting there, in her warm, inviting home, existing in this magical space somewhere between friendship and something more, something undefined and full of possibility. Eventually, I stood to leave. She walked me to the door, her hand grazing my arm. "Thank you for trusting me tonight," she said. I paused before stepping out. "Sita, thank you for inviting me. I didn't know how much I needed this." As I drove home under the faint hum of streetlights, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside me, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, like the turning of a page. I had no idea what the next chapter would bring, but for the first time in a long while, I was willing to find out. The following week at the office passed with a quiet energy between Danielle and me. It wasn't awkward, far from it. It was as if something sacred had happened between us that Saturday night, and now we were both carrying it gently, protecting it from the buzz and bustle of the workday world. Our conversations remained friendly, professional, But there was a deeper layer now, a new awareness, a warmth in her glances, a softness in the way she said my name. I found myself thinking about her more than I expected, her voice, her calm, the way she looked at me, like I mattered, in ways that had nothing to do with my resume or department reports. It was confusing and yet not unwelcome. Efforty morning, just as I was finishing me second coffee in the break room, Danielle walked in. She smiled when she saw me, but didn't speak right away. Instead, she poured herself a cup, then leaned against the counter beside me. Are you doing anything this weekend? She asked casually. Not really, just catching up on laundry and maybe cleaning out the garage, I said with a small chuckle. Exciting, she teased, then paused. Want to call me by again? I made a stew recipe I want you to try. Nothing fancy, just company. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, I did, but something about the growing connection between us made me feel like I was walking along a shoreline, unsure how deep the water would be once I stepped in. Still, I said yes. Saturday camp quickly. I'd brought a bottle of Wynneth this time and even wore my favorite sweater, the one in that mossy green shade that always brought out the hazel in my eyes. I told myself it was just a thoughtful gesture, nothing more. Danielle greeted me at the door again, barefoot once more, this time in soft jeans and a loose white shirt. She looked effortlessly at ease, like someone who had nothing to prove. Her home smelled like rosemary and garlic, something warm and nurturing. Dinner was easy, light-hearted. We talked about silly things, music from the 70s, terrible dates we'd once suffered, weird office gossip. I laughed had more than I had in months. My shoulders felt lighter, like I could finally let go of the weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. After dinner, we settled into her living room again, this time closer together on the couch. I noticed the way her knees almost touched. Neither of us moved away. You seem different tonight, Danielle said softly. I raised an eyebrow. Different? How? Lighter? More open? I gave a small shrug. Maybe I just feel safe here. Her eyes met mine and something passed between you, tender, unspoken, steady. She reached for me hand again, but this time didn't let go. You don't have to explain anything, she said. I just want you to know I see you grin, and I like what I see. Me heart thudded and I looked away briefly, unsure what to say. I wasn't used to being on the receiving end of something so direct, so genuine. It wasn't about romance, at least not in the traditional sense. It was about connection, recognition, with souls gently reaching out in a world that often asked women like us to be quiet, to disappear into the background. Think, I said slowly. I've spent most of me life waiting for permission to feel to want something. For myself, I was a good wife, a steady mother, a responsible employee, but somewhere along the way I forgot how to want something just because it made me feel. Ayla Vedinal didn't respond right away. She simply squeezed my hand and leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. Sat like that for a while, silent, connected. Still the crackle of Theffer place, the only sound between us. And then she said something I didn't expect. He invited you over last week because it needed someone who wouldn't judge Mezamion, who knew the value of Queetrith. What's hat do you mean? I asked gently. Danielle sat up, tucking her legs underneath her. Her voice dropped, more hesitant now. I'd always been drawn to women who carry stories in their silence, women who've lived. And I've spent so long pretending that didn't mean anything to me. But when I talk to you, Corinne, I feel like I can finally be honest about who I am. I could feel her vulnerability sitting right there, unbeatable between us, raw and real. And I realized in that moment that she wasn't the only one opening up. I think I've been waiting for someone to give me that space, too, I said quietly. Danielle looked at me, really looked. And for the first time I felt like I wasn't the older woman in the room. I wasn't the widow or the HR manager, or the woman who still wore her wedding ring out of Habiti. Was just me. And she saw that there was no kiss, no dramatic music swelling in the background, just two women sitting side by side, breathing in the same quiet truths. I left her house that night, the wind sharp against my cheeks. I felt something begin to thaw inside me, not just the alieniness, but the parts of me I had buried beneath duty, years, and Lossie didn't know what was happening between us. But I knew it mattered, and I knew I was finally ready to see where it might lead. The following days unfolded with a strange kind of quiet anticipation. I found myself lingering a little longer at my desk, glancing at the hallway whenever I heard footsteps, half hoping they were hers. Danielle and I kept things professional in the office, but the air between us had shifted like a familiar melody, now carrying new tender lyrics. It was subtle, a longer glance during meetings, the way her hand would rest on the back of my chair just a second too long, or how our fingers occasionally brushed when passing papers. It wasn't inappropriate. It was private ears. And in those fleeting moments, I felt more alive than I had in years. That Friday, as we passed each other near the elevator, she looked at me and said, "Come by tomorrow. I want to show you something." There was no explanation or details, but I didn't need them. I simply nodded. Saturday came with soft rain. The kind that tapped gently against the window sand made everything outside look slightly blurred and dreamlike. I wore a navy blue blouse and simple silver earrings, things I hadn't reached for in a while. Not because I wanted to impress her exactly, but because I wanted to feel present, like I was walking into something meaningful, not just another evening. When I arrived, Danielle was in the kitchen, her hair tied back loosely, sleeves rolled. She looked up and smiled. It wasn't wide or performative. It was gentle, welcoming. "I made tea," she said. "Thought we could sit in the sun porch. Rain sounds beautiful out there." I followed her through the house to a small glass enclosed porch that overlooked her backyard. It was dim, lit only by soft lamps and the misty light filtering through the rain streeted windows. There were cushions scattered across the floor, woven through draped across a chair, and the faint scent of jasmine from a candle burning nearby settled into the space, legs crossed, hands warming around mugs. The rain whispered around us like a lullaby for grown-ups who had forgotten how to be still. "I've been thinking about what you said," Danielle began, "about waiting your whole life for permission. That stayed with me." I nodded slowly. "It's strange how we do that, isn't it? How silence our own voices because we think it's the first." Looked at me for a long moment. "I grew up hiding parts of myself, not because anyone told me to, but because I was afraid they would understand, and that fear, it doesn't always go away just because we grow older." There was something in her voice that broke me a little, because I understood it deeply hid. "After Mark died," I said, "not on purpose, but in little ways. I stopped going to dinner parties. I let friendships fade. I became this quiet version of myself that didn't ask for much, just went through the motions." She reached for my hand again, and this time there was no hesitation in either of you. Her fingers intertwined easily, naturally, like they belonged that way. "You don't have to be quiet with me," she said. "Another." I could feel tears welling, but I didn't pull away. I didn't hide. Instead, I told her things I hadn't told anyone in years, about the loneliness of being admired, but not known, about the ache of empty holidays, the nights when I spoke out loud to a photograph, just to feel less invisible. And she told me things too, about the women she loved but never introduced to her family, about the fear of being seen as too much, too bold, too different. We weren't confessing, we were connecting. Shink. Our stories together, like patches in a shared quilt of experience. Evenly the tea grew cold, the rain slowed, but neither of us moved. Danielle let go of my hand, only to reach behind her, pulling a small photo album from a shelf. "I want to show you something," she said, echoing her words from the day before. She opened the album and flipped to a page near the back. There were photographs, old, warm-toned, clearly cherished. Hedone showed her with a woman in her 20s, both smiling under a summer sun. There was joy in the picture, but also something wistful. Her name was Elena, she said. "I loved her, but I let her go because I wasn't brave enough." Thini looked at her, not with judgment, but with understanding, and she smiled. "I don't want to live like that anymore." Hiding, holding back, I reached out and closed the album gently, my hand resting over hers. "You're not the only one who's ready for something more." The words hung in the air like a promise. You didn't speak for a long time after that way. Didn't need to. The silence was full of everything we'd both been missing: truth, recognition, and the soft blooming of something new. When I finally stood to leave, the world outside had darkened. A dindo night, but inside something felt bright. Ayla Vedana walked me to the door. She didn't kiss me, but she looked at me like she might someday. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of that possibility. As I drove home, the reflection of streetlights gliding across my windshield, I realized something important. It wasn't just about Danielle. It was about me, about reclaiming parts of myself I had quietly tucked away. I wasn't chasing youth or romance. I was embracing presence, permission, and maybe just maybe love in a form I had never allowed myself to imagine before. The following weeks unfolded like pages from a journal I didn't know I was writing. Danielle And he didn't rush into anything. There were no dramatic declarations. No breathless mints stolen in dark corners. What grew between us was something deeper, layered and careful. Like a well-tended garden finally given the sunlight it needed. At work, we kept things respectful as always, but after hours, we gave ourselves room to breathe. Sometimes that meant long walks through the nearby arboretum, where we spoke about everything from childhood memories to regrets we still carried. Other times it was simple, cooking together in her kitchen, sharing a laugh as we accidentally burned garlic bread or listening to records on her old turntable. The crackle of vinyl filling the quiet between our words. It wasn't the kind of connection most people expected were an unlikely pair. On the surface seem at 61, recently learning how to feel again, and her just into her 40s, confident, inquisitive, carrying her own kind of sadness. But it worked because it wasn't based on appearance or novelty. It was built on truth. And when you think that age melts away, one evening, a spring finally started to stretch its fingers into the cold. Danielle invited me over. Againi just finished pruning my garden earlier that day, and still had the faint scent of lilac clinging to my sweater. She met me at the door with 2 glasses of white wine and a nervous "Smile, want to ask you something," she said. I stepped inside, raising an eyebrow. "That sounds serious," chuckled and led me out to the porch where the twilight painted everything in soft lavender and gold. We sat down and I noticed she had lit candles around the space. Not romantic ones, just small tea lights flickering gently in the breeze. "I've been thinking about this a lot," she began, her voice calm but thoughtful. "About you, about us, and how unexpected this all was." I nodded. "Tell me about it," she smiled. "I guess I want to know if this, what we found here, is something you want to keep exploring without pressure, without expectation, just honesty." It was one of those moments where Lefen rose down to a single breathe question, not just about relationship but about self-truth. Was I willing to continue causing openness, vulnerability, change? I didn't need to think long. Yes, I saying it because it's easy, but because I've never felt more like myself than I do when I'm with you. She reached across the small table and took me hand, her thumb brushing gently alongside of mine. The warmth of her touch wasn't electric. It was grounding, family like coming home to something I'd long forgotten. That night, we stayed out on the porch until the candles burned low. She told me stories from her college years. I shared memories of raising my son, who now lived across the country. We cried a little out a lot, and somewhere between her leaning her head on my shoulder and me lacing our fingers together without a word, I realized something. Love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. It don't always come rushing in with fireworks and fanfare. Sometimes it arrives like a gentle question, asked with care and answered with truth. In the days that followed, it began to notice subtle shifts within myself. I walked with a straighter spinny, started wearing lipstick again, connected with an old friend I'd let drift away, and most importantly, I gave myself permission to feel joy again. Daniel and I never labeled what we didn't need to. We were companions, skydendized, 2 women who had lived very different lives, but arrived at the same place with open hearts and steady hands. The office remained the same on the surface, but I carried something new with me now, a quiet confidence, a glow I didn't hide. People noticed, said they'd say I looked more rested later. And I suppose I was. An afternoon I caught my reflection in the mirror in the women's lounge. For the first time in years, I really saw myself, not just the age in my eyes or the gray at my temples, but the woman I had become. A Somion who had dared to step outside of the lines, who had chosen to live, not just exist. As I walked out of the room, I passed Danielle in the hallway. She glanced at me with that same soft smile, the one that started all of this, and I smiled back, knowing that whatever come next, whether it was more nights under soft porch lights or unexpected down the road, I would face it fully, wholly, and without apology. Because I had been seen, because I had allowed myself to be known, and because sometimes the most surprising chapters in life are the ones that begin when you finally said yes to your own art.